We all deserve the chance to have a great career in life. Throughout my journey, I have made so many mistakes that I sometimes wish there was someone to help me avoid some of them. Mistakes are not intrinsically bad. Mistakes are basically how we learn. They're very essential for our learning process and for our growth. However, we don't have to repeat exactly the same mistakes that others have gone through before. Sometimes, it's a bit more efficient for us to learn from other people's experiences and avoid repeating specifically the more costly mistakes. This channel is all about learning and growth. Through a series of tutorials, fireside chats, and even my live stream sessions, I'm hoping to share everything I have learned throughout my career with you. My name is Bassem, and this is Glitch. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me on this live stream. I know it's been a while, but unfortunately, I have been a little bit busy with taking care of some things in life, as most of you probably are. I want to wish you also Ramadan Kareem. I know that the Eid is coming up. I hope your fasting went well and you are enjoying this period of time with all of your family and loved ones. I also want to say I wish you all a blessed Easter. Easter happened last week, but I also hope that you were able to enjoy that period of time with everyone you love. As usual, I want to remind everyone that whatever I share on my live streams are my personal opinions. They have nothing to do with my current or previous employers. And I also share stuff from my own experience and things I've read, things I've explored, things I've discovered, and a lot of the insights are coming directly from me. In today's live stream, we're going to be talking about a topic that is also really fascinating for me, at least, and that I'm also still exploring myself, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I definitely don't have all the answers. I'm not a researcher. I don't have empirical evidence for what I'm sharing with you. What I'm sharing with you are basically insights. They are personal experiences. They are observations from me having worked in so many different markets, in different companies of different sizes, and with different people. However, that doesn't mean that these insights are generally representative, or maybe they present the entire globe. There might be areas in the world where these things don't apply. There might be scenarios that I haven't personally thought of. There might be situations where that I haven't been exposed to. So whatever I share with you, take it with a grain of salt. It's an opportunity for you to be curious about these topics. It's an opportunity for you to explore them even further. And what I share with you are pretty much the starting points for a lot of these things, right? So don't consider me an authority at all on any of this. And I would not consider many people also authorities. I would do my own research always, but I consider people's thoughts to be starting points, to be accelerators for my own learning and exploration journey. So thank you very much again for everyone who joined us on this lovely Saturday. I'm gonna make sure that this session is not as lengthy as the other ones, just because I know you want to enjoy the weekend and I don't want to make it too long for you folks. Just a quick reminder that these live streams are recorded and they will be available on my YouTube channel. This is the link for it. Glich.stream, very easy, glitch without a T. It's my way of naming this channel. Don't ask me why. That would be a story for another time. And I also want to mention that finally I got the time to launch the podcast. The podcast is nothing but the fireside chats extracted in audio form. because I know that a lot of you would like to listen to these sessions as opposed to watch them, through video. And YouTube doesn't really make it easy to do that unless you have premium. And who wants to buy yet another subscription? So my podcast is now available via this link. So you go to glich.stream/podcast and you will land on the anchor.fm page. You can subscribe to my podcast. It's available on pretty much everywhere: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. And there's an RSS feed if there's some platform that you use that is not listed there. You can just add the RSS feed to your favorite podcast player, and then you will have all of the episodes. I am releasing them gradually until all of them become available, but expect every episode to be there in the upcoming few weeks. And with that said, let's get to our topic of the day. So let's start first of all by a definition of what is a generalist, right? What is a generalist? What is a specialist? What is a generalist software engineer specifically? So you need to be aware that I'm a little bit biased because I consider myself to be a generalist software engineer, right? And the characteristics of a generalist software engineer are that they have the ability to work across the stack. And you might ask me, okay, great, what is the stack, right? At the end of the day, we create recipes, right? We write code that runs on certain machines. The stack is everything that starts from pretty much the hardware layer all the way up to the abstractions that we see and the output that we see through our peripherals, right? Whatever these peripherals might be, they might be our screens, they might be other devices, they might be other controllers, whatever the output is, right? So anything across this layer is considered the stack. Now, of course, obviously, you cannot be an expert in the entire stack. That this type of folks, maybe they exist. You will have the capacity to understand what's happening on the hardware level, but there will always be a limit to how far you can go in terms of depth, right? So when we say hardware, you might understand computer architecture. Sure, great. You might understand the CPU architecture. You might understand the architecture of your motherboard and how things work out. You might understand what happens on the bit level. You might understand what happens on the microcontroller level. You might understand what happens on the semiconductor level. You might understand what happens on the quantum level, right? Quantum mechanical level, which is great. But I don't think there are a lot of people have who have all of the insights about what happens, across the hardware level, and then have the ability to go all the way and be proficient in every single way. But, however, that doesn't mean that you cannot be a generalist. You can have a certain level of depth that is deemed acceptable or workable knowledge, right? That's the thing that you need to understand. Workable knowledge is very important. Workable knowledge means that you have enough understanding of a certain topic that you can work with, in the sense that if you need to do a little bit more research, you can. If you want to understand it at a deeper level, you know what you don't know, right? You know that the X exists, and then you can start looking deeper into X, right? You know that Y exists, and you know the relationship between X and Y, so on and so forth. So that's the first thing. A generalist has the ability to work across the stack. They have a general understanding and a lot of breadth in so many different areas. They have this sort of perspective across the whole chain, and they are able to dig deeper. That's the second important part, right? They have the ability to process information and ability to acquire knowledge at a faster pace. That's not necessarily to say that this is a superpower or anything of that sort, but I personally believe that having the ability to identify signal from the wealth of information out there at a quick rate allows you to be a more performant generalist. That doesn't mean that for you to be a generalist, you have to be, an information parsing machine. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you will have an advantage if you have that capacity to process information very quickly and to identify signal from the noise, because there's plenty of information out there. And you, over time, by being a good generalist, right, you will start identifying ways where you can really start finding the signal right away when you process a certain body of information. That body of information could be maybe a scientific paper, it could be a Wikipedia page, it could be some random Google search or whatever other searching engine you use, right? Having the ability to acquire process information at a very quick pace is very important for you to be an efficient generalist. Ability to identify and recognize patterns is the second very relevant and highly important skill that allows generalists to be capable of performing, in the sense that um, you don't have to solve every single problem in the world to be able to develop a more generalized understanding of that type of problems. Our human brain is wired to identify patterns, and we have the great capacity to categorize different problems that we see and that we interact with. If we didn't have that capacity, we would be very less smart. Let's put it that way, because then we will not have the ability to generalize what we learn in certain area to other areas, right? We will not have the ability, if we solve a certain puzzle in some place, to use that information, that knowledge that we acquired, about how we solve this problem in another area. So having the ability to recognize and identify patterns is very essential and important, and this is also a critical skill for journalists, in my opinion, which allows us to utilize and leverage solutions from one field in another field. And this is where the power of generalists comes in, right? Next is having the ability to. Oh, sorry. This is the one I wanted to mention. Having the ability to reuse the learnings from one topic and another. This is also a very important skill that I just mentioned, and being experts in your own learning capabilities. Right? We talked about learning how to learn. We talked about identifying your own capacities and your methods of learning. It's very important for generalists to have a very good self-understanding, self-awareness, right, of how you acquire information, how you acquire knowledge. If you don't know how your brain processes information, then you have a big gap, right? You're not going to be able to assimilate information and identify patterns and acquire knowledge at a very fast pace, because you don't really know how to optimize which information you need to look at if you don't know how you learn. It's very essential for you to acquire this skill as early as possible if you want to be a performing generalist, and a performing generalist software engineer at that, right? Because just to give you some perspective on what it means to work across the stack, it means pretty much that, let's say you can build a solution end to end, right? You can build the back end component, you can build the infrastructure component, you can build the front end component, and if there's an area that you're not really capable of delivering value immediately at, you have the capacity to acquire working knowledge in that topic, right, for you to get across the finish line. That doesn't mean that whatever you're going to build in the area where you're lacking is going to be the most optimal way of doing it. Of course not, because if you can do it at that level, that means you are a specialist. And this brings us to the definition of what is a specialist software engineer. Specialists don't necessarily mean that they know absolutely nothing but one topic. Not at all. Specialists could be also capable of understanding a wide variety of topics. They might have the capacity to also operate across the stack. That's for sure. I don't think there is any software engineer that's just, if they know barely the syntax of one language, that they are able to work at a professional capacity. Of course, you can get by working like some types of tasks, maybe some bug fixes, but at some point, not having the rest of the knowledge will haunt you. You're not going to be able to grow. You're not going to be able to take on more complicated problems. You're not going to be able to tackle different types of challenges. And you're going to be very, very limited in your capabilities, right? I mean, I remember from my early days of starting in this field, and I'm talking when I was a teenager, I didn't really have an understanding. Programming was more of, grabbing certain things, putting them together, and just trying to get things to work. Brute forcing solutions is obviously a way to go, right? But it will not get you far, and it will take you a really long time to solve problems if you don't have a good understanding. So that's why I say specialists are not necessarily people who don't understand anything but the field that they work in. No, specialists could be also partially generalists, but they have deep technical knowledge in a very specific domain that, let's say, a smaller number of people have that level of knowledge in, right? They focus on subtopics, they focus on certain niche. What's the plural of niche? Niches? Maybe. Anyway, they focus on certain subtopics and they go really deep into them. And when I say deep, I mean they develop a level of understanding that is not necessarily available and that is not necessarily easily searchable. And what I mean by that is you cannot just Google and search for the knowledge of a specialist. If you have that capacity, that means that that's more probably in the realm of generalization now. That's more of public knowledge. Specialists are individuals, in my opinion, again, my opinion, right? There's not a global definition. This is my personal definition of what a specialist is and what I consider a specialist. I consider a specialist as someone who has information in their mind or structured in some way that you cannot really find anywhere else. They might have written about it, of course. They might have published things about it. They might have shared that information elsewhere, right? Of course. But the understanding, the transformation of information to knowledge and the way it's structured in their mind, right? That's not easily, you cannot easily find this anywhere else. And this could really be across the board. This could be on the hardware level. You have some people who have so much experience in designing PCBs, for example, that they are able to really optimize a certain design very quickly, and they are able to design efficient PCBs that use less material, that use less connections, that are less prone, that are easily manufacturable, so on and so forth. And again, I'm not an expert in PCB design, but I'm just thinking right now from the top of my head. I'm sharing some examples. Some people might be experts in writing, firmware code. I personally have never written a firmware. I have never written code for a microcontroller or a device at that level, right? You have definitely a lot of experts that understand very well how to extract every single, how to milk basically a microcontroller and how to write efficient code that is, utilizes the bare minimum resources possible because they are operating under heavy constraints, right? When we're talking about microcontrollers that have, I don't know, like 1 megabyte, 10 megabyte, and 10 megabyte is a lot nowadays. Like in previous days, 10 megabyte was considered impossible even. So when you have, like, let's say 10 megabytes and you want to process an audio, for example, right? How do you do that? Like, how do you process audio from a microphone? How do you record it on a device if you only have 10 megabytes of working memory? That's definitely not an easy task, right? Um, and you have to chunk it in a certain way, and you have to make sure that you maintain the integrity of the audio that you record on the device, so on and so forth. Again, all of this to say that there are specialists who have the knowledge that is not easily searchable and findable uh, outside of their minds. And sometimes when someone gets to that level of depth, they have invested so many hours, so much time in getting that level of knowledge, right? They have spent so many days, even thousands of hours, building these insights, that they are generally reluctant or hesitant to switch to other areas of specialty. And this is why I think specialists, they identify a certain comfort zone that they are, highly capable in, and then it becomes very difficult for them to get out and look at the bigger picture. I'm not sure whether, people who prefer to be in that realm, this is how they are wired, or this is how they prefer to be, or maybe this is the area where they find they can add most value, or maybe it's their comfort zone, or maybe, I don't know. There might be many reasons why people might prefer to be in that domain. Maybe even financially they are making, a good return on all of this experience and level of knowledge. So, um, so yeah, there are many reasons why specialists prefer to stick to their domain. They might be even they have some level of prestige, maybe, by being specialists in these specific areas, and that could happen on so many different levels. That could happen on the academic level. That could happen at in your work, right? You have people at work who are considered experts in a certain domain, and everyone goes to them to ask, how can we do this, how can we do that, can we pick your brain on a certain on this topic, can we get your insights, what do you think if we do this as opposed to that, right? And people, I think, who are in that level and they feel some level of satisfaction, I think, from having people come to them and considering them specialists in certain areas, that they start having the tendencies not to, not to explore other domains because they will feel like they are starting over, maybe. And this is just me again projecting. It's might not necessarily be how they feel, but this is how I think that specialists um, how I think why specialists behave the way they do, or maybe why they stick to the domains. Now, this is not to say that if you choose a path, you have to stick with it for the rest of your career. Obviously not. Just like I said previously in earlier videos, careers are not linear. They do not go on one line where you have different checkpoints and you have to go through these different checkpoints for you to get to the next level. That's not how it works. Careers can be very messy, they can be very dynamic, they can be very chaotic, they can be, there are so many variables that affect how you progress in your life and your career. So there many different things might make you generalists in certain occasions, and many different variables can push you towards becoming a specialist on in certain topics and in certain domains and in certain periods of your life, right? There is not just one way. I think awareness of what it means to be a generalist and what it means to be a specialist allows you to identify in which stage you are and how to capitalize on this mode, let's say, of working that you are in right now, right? All right. I don't see a lot of interaction in the chat, so I'm assuming you probably don't have answers. Let me double check that. Maybe there's some integration problem or something along these lines. So um, having a look at the chat right now. Please feel free to drop in your questions. I would love to take on your commentaries, your questions, your insights. Um, all right, I can see a something from Khalid over here. Let's put it on screen and let's see. Khalid is saying some people may be afraid of being a junior again if they move from their specialty to a new one. Yes, 100%. Of course, it depends on the company and field. Yeah, I'm happy that you saw that observation as well. I have seen that observation myself with some people. Again, they have a tendency of worry, let's say, of being considered junior, indeed. But in my opinion and in my experience, that rarely happens. Like I give you an example of that. I joined GitHub, and GitHub is a Ruby shop, for example, and I have never written a single line of Ruby before. Does that mean that I cannot be productive? Of course not, because the patterns and the experience that I have throughout my career is pretty much the same. From a system design perspective, that knowledge is not going to disappear because I don't know a little bit of Ruby. And acquiring Ruby as a language, for example, is what, a weekend project. And I'm not saying I'm going to become an expert in Ruby, but having working level experience in Ruby is a weekend's work if you have programmed in similar languages before. Learning about Rails, the framework, is what, maybe a couple of weekends if you've built with similar frameworks before. There obviously are going to be certain quirks and as areas that require a little bit of depth, and you probably are not even aware of certain features. And this is where specialists, the role of specialists can come in. But does that mean that you have to be a Ruby on Rails specialist for your entire career? I think that holds less value, to be honest, on the long run. So let's jump, after defining what generalists and specialists are, let's jump to contrasting them, and let's talk about the benefits of being in either category, right? So, first of all, in my opinion, specialization requires a certain technique, right? And in our domain, even though it's technical domain, we write code. There is a level of technique there, but it's not the same level that you can define by doing more of the same, because the challenges that we tackle are sometimes very different from previous challenges that we tackled in our lives or in our career, right? And let me contrast this with learning an instrument, for example. Learning an instrument or learning a sort of a mechanical skill is completely different than programming, and I will tell you why. So, learning a guitar, for example, or the cello, or violin, or whatever, requires a certain level of technique that is very mechanical, that you have to develop over extended periods of time. You cannot pick up a guitar and be able to play anything that sounds okay within a short period of time. There needs to be some muscle memory that is developed. There needs to be some technique that is developed. You need to learn how to position your hand in a certain way. You need to train your muscles to flex and extend in a certain way. Even if you can hear the music in your head, and even if you have a good understanding of music theory and you're able to identify the notes and the pitches very quickly, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to play the instrument proficiently at the from the get-go, right? And this is why specialization in these areas is very important, because you cannot just pick up an instrument and then and then have working experience, and that's the key term, right? Working knowledge, working capacity in it in a short period of time, unlike coding, where I can get someone who has absolutely no clue about coding today, and I will bet you that in 48 hours I can teach them enough for them to be able to solve a certain level of problems. And this is completely different than acquiring or learning an instrument, for example, or learning how to golf, or learning how to drive a car. These are complete the other. And again, it's not a matter of complexity, it's just a matter of how we acquire this. Learning how to code requires very little. The barrier to entry is very minimal, and you don't really need to sit down and practice uh, basic syntax over and over again. Maybe to memorize it, sure, but like the basic fundamental concepts are so easy that you can do so much with very little at the beginning, right? I'm not saying this is not to say that anyone who learns some conditionals and some loops and how to assign variables and whatnot is a developer, right? Well, I mean, it really depends on how you want to define a developer. They are able to write code, they are able to solve problems. Sure, there are levels and degrees of proficiency, of course, right? Um, but um, but they're able to work. So um, again, technique in our domain is not that fundamental. Of course, with time, technique can translate more towards being able to build better abstractions, maybe even being able to build software that doesn't break as easily, software that is more resilient, software that is easier to maintain, software that is testable. But I consider this part to be not necessarily technique. It's more, um, experience in a sense. Because I can teach a technique like design patterns to someone, but that doesn't mean that they're gonna know how to use it effectively. And I've seen this so many times, people misusing design patterns, thinking that just by applying design patterns, immediately their code is gonna be more readable, highly maintainable, so on and so forth. It's never the case. And that comes with a lot of experience and doing mistakes and seeing bad patterns. And I also think in this field, we should be able to demonstrate bad patterns a little bit more often than demonstrating how things should be done. Because we showcase a lot of the high level stuff, saying, yeah, you should write your code this way. But we never explain why and what is the contrast and why is the other side. Maybe if we show the other side and why it's not necessarily good, it will be much better than showing how it should look like. But this is, again, a topic for another day. Um, Software engineering on day to day has very little to do with writing code, right? And this is something that we all discover throughout our careers and that we don't necessarily always like. And this is something that we get shocked by. And today I have published a post about the law of diminishing returns, which I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes. But yeah, I mean, big news if you don't know already, software engineering is not about writing code. At some point, writing code will become a very regular activity, and your companies and your teams will want you to do more of the people management aspect, more of the communication aspect, more of the architecture and design work, as opposed to writing code on a daily basis. And this is why being a specialist in software engineering has very limited band and opportunities down the line. And this is the next topic I want to talk about, which is compensation opportunities. Compensation opportunities are very important, and in my opinion, generalists have a much higher opportunity to be able to find employment at any point in their career if they adopt sort of a generalist mindset. Because, first of all, there is a lot of demand. So, right now, everyone wants pretty much software engineers. The coffee shop down the street needs software engineers for whatever reason. every This is to say that every company wants to hire right now, and there is a very high shortage of talent available. And let me be very clear about this. There's very high shortage of senior talent available. There's a huge abundance of junior engineers. And an abundance of junior engineers is because there are a lot of boot camps that are training people on how to become software developers. The universities have wider programs. They are accepting more people. There's a lot of awareness about it. The pay is very high and inflated to a point where a lot of people are considering career switches as well. So there is a huge supply of people who don't have a lot of experience, but companies don't necessarily want that category. They want people who have experience because they want to deliver more efficiently, they want to deliver faster. And the companies who can afford to pay high salaries, they are uh, paying them to acquire senior and experienced talent. Anyway, this is to say that generalists have a higher opportunity to find employment. They will be able to always find a job because they don't stick to a specific technology stack, for example. They don't stick to a specific area of the field, and they have the capacity to jump in between areas whatever the business and the company they're joining or whatever project they are working on needs. This is again another keyword: whatever the project or the company or the business needs. And this is where generalists excel traditionally, and this is where they can add more value. Um, Again, adding business value is a very critical concept that many software engineers struggle with, because software engineers at the beginning of their career, they think that their job is simply to write code that works. Sure, that's part of the job, right? But why are you writing code? Why are you building whatever you are building? What is the fundamental nature of the business or the company that you have joined? Do they sell your time? Are you writing code for customers? Because if they're selling your time, then you writing more code is pretty much what needs to happen, and then you're adding business value. If they are selling a product, then that means that the product is the business, selling the product is the business, and then you add business value by creating features, by making the product better, by enhancing the product, by fixing bugs, but by making the product more reliable, so on and so forth. So again, a lot of engineers struggle with this concept at the beginning. So it's very important for you to be aware of the business, of your relationship with the business value. And once you understand this relationship, you will realize that generalists have the opportunity to have a higher impact on the business itself. Why? Because they have multiple ways where they can intervene to add business value beyond just writing code. They might be able to write code on different levels. Some people might quit, for example, and then a generalist can come in and pick up the work of certain people in a specific area. Does that mean that they're gonna write good code as specialists in that domain are gonna write? Not necessarily. But does that mean that they're gonna allow the business to continue and to survive and to move forward? Yes, and that is business value. And your relationship with the business value will also determine your compensation level. If you become indispensable for a certain company, they will do whatever they can to retain you, and they will do whatever they can to pay you accordingly, right? You don't get a raise at the end of the year just because the performance review time came in. You don't get a raise or a bonus at the end of the year just because you appeared, right? Your salary is supposed to compensate your time, not the bonus or the raise at the end of the year. The bonus or the raise at the end of the year are related to your ability to impact the business and your ability to add business value, right? So again, this is why specialists sometimes struggle with being promoted, because they think that by being specialists they are contributing to the business value, while in fact they might not necessarily be doing so as much as generalists are able to do that, right? And I'll tell you why. Because let's say we have an application that has been, it's being built for a decade, 15 years, 20 years maybe. We have specialists, we have two or three people that know these very specific areas of the code base, and we really cannot let them go. I cannot talk a lot about details, but let's just say that I have seen this before, where I have seen companies that have um, very old code bases, like really, really old, where they had literally two or three people who understand certain pieces of that code base. And these people were going on retirement soon. Imagine that of a how much of a crisis that is, right? What are you going to do? You're going to bring back people from retirement anyway. Obviously, these people are specialists, right? Because they understand something that others don't. They have knowledge that you cannot easily search for. They have knowledge that you cannot easily acquire, even if you try to. They have knowledge that needs to be transferred from them to other people, right? So these specialists obviously are extremely highly compensated. Obviously, the company cannot risk losing them, so they will keep on paying them whatever is necessary to retain them. The business understands that they are also a liability because the business continuity depends on these people, and that's not necessarily a situation that the business wants to be in, because yeah, you cannot risk losing the entire business just because you have three people understand a certain level of the code base. And that's why you will notice that a lot of businesses will attempt whatever they can to avoid this type of scenarios, but still it happens. And again, out of these three people are out of a company that employs about 4 or 5 thousand software engineers. So out of the 5,000, you have three people who are specialists and they are highly compensated because of their speciality. So consider that the next time you wanna venture into a certain area and you wanna avoid being sort of a generalist and you wanna stick to a very specific narrow niche field, right, or niche topic. Uh, Consider that in terms of compensation. And now, of course, these people, these three specialists, they can pretty much work anywhere. But would they really find the same work conditions? Would they really be compensated and valued as much outside of the company? I highly doubt it because the area of their specialty is very, very specific to that company, and I'm pretty sure they're gonna struggle to find employment at the same level, at the same for them to maintain even the same lifestyle, maintain even the same compensation, so on and so forth in other places. So being a specialist obviously pays more if you are part of the lucky bunch, but on the long run, that's not necessarily a good thing for you to be in, or a good situation for you to be in, because it really limits your options. And obviously, I hate the concept where people say, "Yeah, you cannot be you can be the jack of all trades, but a master of none." Sorry, but this is bullshit. I believe you can be the jack of all trades and a very proficient engineer in many. I know for a fact that I am just as much capable of building back end solutions as I am able to build front end solutions. I say this very openly that I'm not a very good mobile developer just because I never invested the time in understanding the technology stack or building for it. Does that mean I cannot build an app? For sure, I can. Does that mean this app is going to be the best and top of the line? Highly unlikely, because I need a lot of experience in that area. But still, I definitely consider myself an expert in a bunch of areas and fields, because I invest the time in them and I know a lot about them. So you can definitely be an expert in so many different things, and don't let anyone convince you otherwise. um, as junior engineers, I don't recommend that you spread your wings too much, right? Just pick a handful of topics that you can immediately add impact to, and try to be try to learn them. There's nothing really preventing you from broadening your perspective as soon as you develop certain levels, certain patterns, and as soon as you are able to start to generalize a little bit more. It's important for you to acquire the generalist skills that I talked about first before you start acquiring more breadth in different areas and different disciplines. And obviously, the last thing I want to say is that there is no one formula that fits all. We all have different ambitions in life. We all have different career ambitions. We all have different places we want to get to. We all have different things we enjoy doing. Some people just don't enjoy spreading themselves across multiple topics, and that's totally fine. If you choose to tackle one specific area at a time, that's also a very fine way of approaching your career. Just again, be aware of the trade-offs that you are making if you decide to choose either path. And obviously, as I said, there is really no reason why you cannot switch, and why you cannot be an expert in multiple areas, but also a generalist that understands and has a wide breadth. um, Now, let's talk about the law of diminishing returns. I have published a nice visual on my LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, about this. I'm not sure if I can share it on my screen right now. Let me check. Mm, I think you can still see it on my. Okay, there we go. All right, I hope you can see this. Perfect. Yeah, it looks good. So, what I want to share with you is the following. Um, Again, a very simple, very simple graph. It's not necessarily, very, very detailed. But what I want to say about it is, let's consider this axis here that to be your technical abilities, your technical skills, and whatnot, and let's consider this axis over here to be the business value. Of course, at the beginning of your career, right, this is the slope. It's going quite high, the red line, right? You're picking up more skills that allows you to write code more efficiently, faster. You're able to write testable content. You are able to write code that performs well in production. You are able to write code that is maintainable. Your colleagues are not complaining about it. They will always complain, but let's just say that you are able to write code that is better. And at some point, adding more experience, we're just start flattening out. And you're not gonna, the more experience you add, it's just gonna add business value. And again, I'm not saying that you're switching jobs in this case. Let's assume that you're staying in the same company. You stayed for 3, 4, 5 years, and you're picking up skills as you go. At some point, the work is just going to become a little bit more of the same, and the software is going to probably go into maintenance mode. You might be tackling new challenges, you might be tackling new opportunities. That's assuming that the product, for example, that you're building keeps on growing and more work is being added. But obviously, as we know, that products require a certain level of maintenance. And that means that the more technical skills you add, the less business value that you're going to be able to add until you get to a tipping point, right? Beyond which the law of diminishing returns starts to kick in, whereby if you keep on adding more technical skills, your ability to add business value is going to actually diminish. Why? Because if you look at the yellow line, your compensation is going to keep growing with the years, right? It's going to keep going up. And at some point, your compensation will be too high for the technical uh, output, for your technical output. And it would be cheaper for the business, right, to pay someone else to give them something along at this level over here, right? And that gets compensated over here while you are at this point over here, and you are getting compensated much higher than the other person, or let's say higher than the other person, right? Again, bottom line is it would be cheaper to hire maybe new talent that has a little bit less years of experience. That's assuming you're not able to, transitioning to another focus area, which is, for example, leading a team, uh, architecture and design, right? So I'm assuming here that your ability you're increasing your technical specialization in like writing code, for example, building more abstractions, so on and so forth. At some point, that's going to add less value, and then you're going to have to start looking at the bigger picture. You're going to have to start looking at stuff beyond a feature. You're going to have to look at systems. You're going to have to look at system design. You're going to have to look at architecture beyond the small service or the small narrow area where you're working, right? And if you do that, then the law of diminishing returns is not going to kick in because you're taking on more responsibility. You're adding more business value in other forms than just writing code, right? And by doing so, you're going to be able to justify your compensation from a business perspective. And obviously, you're going to be able to grow. And that's why you will see that even though companies build technical tracks, right? Even though they build career ladders for the people in a technical track, these have also an upper bound. So, and the upper bound that I've seen is some people get to the level of, let's say, principal software engineer, and that will be equal to a level of director or maybe a senior director. But beyond the director, senior director, you might have, general managers, you might have vice presidents, senior vice presidents, higher level, C-level executives, so on and so forth. So there is a cap for how far you can go because if you're not really managing a large group of people, then your ability to add value to the business is less and less impactful from a technical standpoint, unless, of course, the entire business depends on a very specific niche area. Like some businesses are concerned with, let's say, I don't know, building rockets. It's rocket science. How many rocket scientists can you find across the world? Obviously, a limited number, less than software engineers, right? So the more these rocket scientists can specialize, the more they are able to optimize the vehicles, the more business value they can bring. Obviously, their compensation will be equal to that, and they might be as important as vice presidents in companies or senior vice presidents, or even the CEOs or whatever the C-level executives themselves. But that's again, that's the exception. That's a very narrow area. That's not the norm. And if you can replicate this in your career, that's fantastic. But what I'm showing you right here is what applies a little bit more generally than what we see in normal, uh, yeah, what we see in normal software engineers' careers. I think we have gotten to the I shared with you everything I wanted to share. I see a few commentaries here and a question from Ahmed who is saying, how do you define depth of knowledge for junior engineers in terms of technologies and stacks? Great. So junior engineers should really focus on, again, as I mentioned, a narrow band at the beginning until you acquire a certain level of depth. Yes. And you mentioned, and you're asking me right now, what is that level of depth? Well, that level of depth, in my opinion, is basically when you are able to write software that is production ready and software that is able to run in production without a lot of unexpected downtime and unexpected problems. Obviously, everyone writes bugs, but the amount of bugs and the severity of the bugs that you write, these will diminish with the more, or these will go down the more experience you will have. So, for example, and again, there are outliers. Obviously, sometimes people write bugs that they could be very, very senior. They could write a bug that would bring down an entire cluster or entire production environment. That's still feasible, but the complexity that they are dealing with is obviously much higher than the complexity of what a junior developer is dealing with, right? So again, there should be a level between the bug impact and the complexity ratio, or sorry, bug impact and complexity ratio, right? I think we can definitely determine this. So what I'm trying to say is, for junior developers, if you write production ready code and you understand everything that happens, you understand the cycle. Let's say you're building web apps, you understand the HTTP flow end to end, what happens from the client side all the way to your back end, and how your back end processes information and pushes it back to the client. And if you're able to really go deep into this and understand it all the way, that would be a good amount of knowledge. And then from there you can start broadening your experience. So instead of just using one backend framework or just building one type of backend services in a certain technology stack, then you can start replicating this experience in other technology stacks, for example. And then from there you can start broadening your knowledge to learn more about caching, to learn more about infrastructure, to learn about more about, for example, how to write stateless applications, and how to do horizontal scaling, and how to build applications that don't always need to read from the database, for example, for them to be able to perform. And you start learning more about distributed systems and eventual consistency, so on and so forth, right? Um, so as junior engineers, again, focus on whatever technology stack your company, the company that you join, uses. At the beginning of your careers, it doesn't matter what technology stack you choose. Pick something and go deep with it, build as much as you can with it. And when you feel comfortable and when you feel like you understand all the facets of it, and trust me, you will feel it. You will know that there are gaps in your knowledge if you're not lying to yourself, right? Once you feel that you are good enough with that, you can start jumping to other areas and start tackling different topics. Eli Mushrik, thank you very much, my friend. I'm very happy to see you join, and we definitely need to catch up again soon. Thank you very much for your comment and your support. Khalid is saying again, what is your advice for people moving from a specialist to a generalist mindset? Is there any methodology to follow so that this process won't take a long time? I love the question. I wish I had an answer from the top of my head. All I can tell you is you need to be comfortable. You need to try to be comfortable with change, and you need to try to be comfortable with uncertainty. You need to try to be comfortable with not knowing. That's the core. aspect of it, right? Not knowing is very important, and having the ability to say, "I don't know, but I can find out." And that's the mindset you need to put yourself in. I don't know, but I can find out. And then from there, the first steps are going to be a little bit more difficult, whereby your searches are not going to lead too much. You're going to feel confusion. But the way I like to look at it is it's as if you're making like a soup, and then the soup will not really just come together until the very end. And you just keep on adding ingredients, but they're not going to all make sense. But at some point, things are going to click. And when they click, there's a lot of satisfaction that comes from that. And this is what being a generalist is. It's like trying to create this soup over and over and over again with different topics until you get to the point where the soup starts to take shape, the texture takes form, and then everything clicks, and you feel like, yeah, this is it. I have an understanding of it. And the way I like to measure personally my understanding of a certain topic is if I am able to explain it to a person who doesn't have any clue about it and they understand what I'm saying. So explain it like I'm five, or if I'm able to literally throw a 1 hour session like this one, fully improvised. I have some notes, obviously, but all the talking points are fully improvised. If you can do that, then you really know your topic, and you're really able to, speak at from a journalist standpoint. It's not easy, and it requires you to rewire a little bit your brain and be in very uncomfortable situations, and it requires a certain level of humility. You have to be humble, and you have to. It's gonna feel bad. It's gonna feel painful, because I know I've been a specialist in certain areas, and being in an uncomfortable zone, that it feels a little bit off. But also, you have to be more quiet as well. Listen to others who know a little bit more than you do. Don't jump to conclusions very quickly. Even if you have your own opinions, you don't necessarily have to share them. Wait, be patient until the soup takes form, and then you can be on your way. Your area of speciality obviously is not going to go away, and what's going to make you special is you're going to be able to use that area of speciality in the new domains that you start playing with. And when you start identifying these crossing points of different disciplines, that's going to be really beautiful. That's really what keeps me going, and I love seeing how my different passions, or my curiosity and love for different topics, they start coming together in a very nice way. And I think that that's what makes journalists a little bit more special. Obviously, the world needs both. This is not to say that one is more superior than the other, and it's not a competition. The world needs journalists and the world needs specialists. And I'm going to give you a couple of references for books that you can read to explore this topic a little bit further. Let's see. Rami Gamal is saying, do you think having a postgraduate degree as master's or PhD is crucial for progressing in the career? Absolutely not. It depends on what career you are pursuing, right? Obviously, you need a postgrad degree to pursue a career in academia if you want to go do research, if you want to join a research institution, so on and so forth. You obviously need that level of higher education. If you are going to join the industry, where you're going to join, like, I don't know, big tech, or companies that are building products or services and whatnot, you don't necessarily need that level. Obviously, you can acquire some of the knowledge that these levels have. The problem with so here's the thing. This is again a complicated topic, but I will address it. So first of all, there's an abundance of people who have PhDs today. Like, before, it was way more difficult. You need to be able to really add a dent in a certain field for you to earn your PhD. I feel like in nowadays, a lot of people are earning their PhDs by contributing very little in a certain in a certain field, not as much as previous PhDs used to contribute. But again, that's not to say that there aren't PhDs that are making major contributions, right? So in the industry, if you have a master's degree, unfortunately, you will be leveled at a lower level. So let's say you are trying to join as a software engineer and you have a PhD. That's not going to hold a lot of value, because the skills that a software engineer needs in a company that builds products, right, does not require that specialization that the PhD has. It's not about your prestige. It's not about how much time you invested in your PhD. If your PhD doesn't necessarily apply to the product and it doesn't add business value, you're going to be leveled at a point where, at a starting point even, I've seen PhDs start as junior developers in companies that are building products, just because their PhDs are not necessarily they don't necessarily add business value, right? So this is a rule of thumb. If your master's degree or whatever, you are able to join a company, for example, in their research department, where your work can be multiplied to create new products, for example, then obviously your PhD and degrees will matter a lot, and you will be compensated um, based on that. But if you want to join as a software engineer, your master's degree will not really add a lot of value here, to be honest. And I'm sorry to tell you about this, but that's the truth. Obviously, there are more companies nowadays that are creating R&D departments. There are a lot of companies that have research departments. Meta, for example, they have a big R&D department. Jan LeCun, he heads the machine learning and AI department at Meta, for example, and obviously they hire a lot of PhDs there, and the PhDs will definitely be of a lot of added value, because that's how they contribute to the business value, to the business in general. Awesome. If there aren't any other questions from anyone, I want to mention a couple of resources. So there is a book called Range, and it's by David Epstein. Thank you very much, Jamie, my colleague who recommended this book. She read it recently, and she recommends it. I'm gonna drop it here in the chat so that whoever is interested in this book can actually look it up. Obviously, I'm how do you say it? Like I have read the book, and let's just say that this is the title of it: Range: Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. I've read the book, and it's not necessarily about software engineering per se. It's about generalists and specialists, in general. It talks about Tiger Woods. It talks about different people in different disciplines, and uh, whether their specialization paid off, and whether it's better to be a generalist or a this is obviously a an opinionated book. I would still recommend reading it just to get the your horizons expanded, but I would not really take whatever it says literally, and I would not really follow it exactly. Just read it as a nice, interesting read, and just something to be curious about. And as I mentioned, there's really not one size fits all. We all have different ambitions in life, and we all want to go different places. I hope that what I shared with you today has added a little bit of value. And I think I'm going to wrap it up here, because I have shared whatever I wanted to. And I just want to thank you all for your continuous support. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I love the interaction, and I love, just trying to add value to your careers. If there's anything that I have missed, I apologize. But thank you very much for your time. I want to wish you a fantastic weekend. I want to wish you a great rest of the week. And I will speak to you again soon with another awesome topic. And in the meantime, again, my DMs are open. Please feel free to reach out. Feel free to comment. And I want to ask you a small favor. If you like this video, please go to my YouTube channel or my podcast. This is going to be available on both of them. Like, subscribe, follow, share it with someone you think that might benefit from this. And please continue engaging with me. This is the only way that I know that I'm adding value, and this keeps me going and encourages me to build more interesting content for you. So I will share the summary of this episode just like I do normally as a mind map across my platforms. You can follow me on all of these. There's Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever you prefer. I publish on all of them. And until next time, I want to wish you all the best, and I will see you on the other side. Take care. Bye bye.